Потому что мы с тобой говорили, я думаю, а это что?
Hello.
Добрий день, шановні учасники. Ми зараз зробимо всі технічні налаштування. У нас з вами ще є 10 хвилин до початку. Добрий день. Просимо вас писати в чаті, звідки ви, і також вашу посаду, ім'я. Просимо всіх зам'ютити відео та звук, щоб ми один одному не заважали. Ми поки що наступні 10 хвилин будемо робити технічне налаштування. Тому у вас ще є 10 хвилин написати, звідки ви, і доробити якісь ваші справи. Hi, Vicky. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I really would like to welcome you and thank you for coming to us today. I know you have a really crazy busy schedule, so it's a really big pleasure and honor for us that you can join us today. I propose that we test our presentation maybe, how it works. Do you know how to do it in Zoom?
Yeah, I think I can just share my screen. Can I not?
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, but I can see only part.
Okay. There we go. Can you see all of it now?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think
and that's, can you see okay now?
Yeah, you don't have video, right? Only presentation.
Only presentation, yeah.
Wonderful, because it's always some problems with video.
And you can see that okay one slide at a time, can you, when I advance them?
Yeah, I think it's okay.
Yeah?
It's wonderful, yeah. So I think we can stop presentation now. And we will wait for 8 minutes more, I think, for everyone to join us. And maybe I will provide you with a small agenda, but I think Dasha already shared with you. So we will start from small opening remark and welcoming words. And then I will give floor to you so you can provide all your information and presentation. For how long do you have your presentation now?
I think it's about 45 minutes to an hour. It depends. Okay. Do you need me to pause for the translation, or will the translation be simultaneous?
It will be simultaneous translation.
Perfect.
And a translator already had joined us. So so it will be simultaneous translation. So you just can speak and that's all. You don't have to stop. And also you have your presentation in Ukrainian already. So participants can read this. And also in the end, you will have time for questions. And I have some questions from our registration form. So I will also ask these questions. I think it will not be really difficult for you to answer these questions because it's all about your work. Yeah, so I think that's all. And in the end, I also will give you a floor to say some last remarks and some ideas that you would like to give to Ukraine in this long way, and we will finish. So if you have your presentation for 45 or up to 1 hour, I think we will finish in 1.5 hours.
Perfect.
With all
Sounds
questions.
good.
Yeah, we will do so. But if we will have a lot of questions, we will really ask you to stay a little bit longer. Usually we have our webinars for 2 hours. But I think that today 1.5 or maybe a little bit more will be as well enough. So that's all. If you have some questions, you can ask. And if not, I propose to wait 6 minutes more until everyone to join us, because we have up to 100 registration today.
Wow.
Yeah, so I hope that at least 2/3 of people will come.
Perfect. Really good. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. And also, do you know how to use translation here? You have to put globe in the end of this page where you can see chat, participant, and you can see this globe. I will show you now.
No, I can't see the globe actually.
Just a second, maybe it's here. No, it's not here. Can you see below exit, red button, exit?
Yeah. Oh, interpretation. Yeah.
Yeah, it's globe and interpretation. Yeah. So you press this button and choose English. So when we will have opening remark, you can hear this in English.
Perfect.
And also questions, you also will have English variant.
That will help a lot.
Yeah. So I think that's all. Yeah, waiting for everyone to join, and we have 5 minutes more to take.
How have your other events gone?
It was really interesting, and the whole event was absolutely different. We had a last week event for police, for judges, and for prosecutors. And our last event was for 2 hours and 30 minutes, because we had really a lot of different participants from different countries, because we wanted to provide an overview of different countries' approach for prosecutors.
Okay.
So it took a little bit longer, but all other was up to 2 hours, and people are really inspired by the information that you provided and all materials. So yeah, we are really happy of how it was. And tomorrow we will have our last webinar with Marie Collins Foundation, and it will be about social services for victims and for their families. Yeah, so it's really busy 3 weeks of preparation of all these events.
Really busy.
Yeah. But
Really busy.
anyway, I'm sure that it's really useful for our participants. So
Yeah, I'm sure.
yeah, okay, so I propose to take 5 minutes more to rest and finish some tasks that we have, and see you here in 5 minutes.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay.
Шановні колеги, ми чекаємо, поки в нас всі приєднаються. Почнемо хвилин за 5. І я вам розповім всі правила і всі інструкції по користуванню цією платформою, тому поки що ви можете писати в чаті, з якого ви міста до нас приєдналися, чи з якого закладу, щоб ви могли трошечки між собою познайомитися. Але ж дуже вас прошу при тому обирати не часне повідомлення, а обирати таке синеньку кнопку нажати і обирати всі на конференції, для того, щоб всі могли бачити ваші відповіді і щоб ви могли познайомитися. Тоді ми чекаємо на всіх учасників і будемо вже за трошки починати. А поки пишіть, звідки ви.
Доброго дня усім. Асю, давайте перевіримо, будь ласка, переклад. Зараз я на іспанському каналі, так? Так, добре, чути. Зараз переключаюсь на англійський. Yes, of course. Thank you. І ще хотіла запитати, Ганна додалася, правильно, до нас? Супер. Дякую. Тоді очікуємо всіх інших і будемо починати. Дякую.
Колеги, вітаю всіх, хто до нас ще доєднався. Потрошки люди ще доєднуються. Просимо всіх учасників вимкнути камери і звук, щоб ми один одному могли не заважати, а чути спікера. Я зараз... Настя, скажи, будь ласка, чи можеш ти приймати учасників, чи тобі потрібна моя допомога?
Ні, Настю, я їх приймаю, все.
Окей. Тоді ми будемо з вами починати. Я думаю, що по дорозі хтось до нас ще буде доєднуватися з учасників. Мене звати Дякова Анастасія, я радник з питань безпечного інтернету при віце-прем'єр-міністрі, міністрі цифрової трансформації, а також засновник освітнього проєкту «Стоп-секстинг». Сьогодні я буду модератором цього заходу. У нас сьогодні з вами буде відбуватися круглий стіл онлайн на тему «Провідні світові практики освітніх програм для дітей та освітян щодо безпеки в інтернеті». Це 6-й захід в рамках міжнародної онлайн-конференції «Діти та інтернет. Відповідь держави» для фахівців системи правоохоронних органів та державного сектору у сфері освіти та соціального захисту населення. Міжнародна онлайн-конференція в нас вже відбувається 3-й тиждень, і вона відбувається за ініціативою повноваженого президента України з прав дитини Миколи Кулеби, в партнерстві з Абаролі Юкрейн, Американською асоціацією юристів ініціативи з верховенства права, освітнім проєктом «Стоп-секстинг», а також громадською організацією «Служба порятунку дітей». Як в нас сьогодні все з вами буде відбуватися? Ми почнемо з невеличкого вітального слова, потім передамо слово нашій колезі з Великої Британії, яка нам розповість про освітню систему Великої Британії щодо захисту дітей в інтернеті. Після того ми з вами пройдемо коротеньке опитування, і в нас буде з вами час для запитань. Тому, якщо у вас раптом під час розповіді нашої колеги будуть виникати запитання, ви, будь ласка, відразу їх пишіть у чаті, щоб ми могли вам на них в кінці відповісти і також вас попросити їх озвучити. Також у нас є короткі правила. Дуже вас просимо не включати звук під час презентації для того, щоб не заважати колегам, і вимкнути відео для того, щоб було менше навантаження на інтернет, і ви могли краще чути і бачити, і колеги також. Тобто це знижує таке навантаження. Що в нас ще є? У нас сьогодні буде спікер з Великої Британії. Це значить, що ми сьогодні будемо чути презентацію англійською мовою. Сама презентація в нас буде українською мовою. Її ви можете отримати в кінці після цього заходу. Але ж для того, щоб обрати мову, вам потрібно внизу екрану обрати перевод або переклад, або translation, в кого якою мовою Zoom встановлений. Ви побачите такий глобус. Вам треба на нього натиснути і обрати, увага, іспанську мову. На жаль, в Zoom немає ще поки що української мови, тому обирайте іспанська мова і будете чути українську мову. Всі запитання ви можете писати, бачу, що приєднуються учасники, тому ще раз повторю про мову зараз. Всі питання ви можете писати українською мовою, ми все перекладемо, не хвилюйтеся. Ще раз нагадую про мову тим, хто щойно приєднався. Для того, щоб обрати українську мову, треба натиснути глобус і обрати іспанську мову. Так, також у нас сьогодні з вами буде відбуватися запис цього заходу, для того, щоб ми далі могли ці матеріали в роботі використовувати. Ще в нас які є правила. Мені здається, правила основні ми пройшли. Тому зараз хочу Настя запитати, чи буде в нас вітальне слово від Дмитра? Настя, чи чуєте мене? Так, потерявся десь зв'язок. Окей, тоді...
Так, Настя.
Чи буде в нас вітальне слово від Дмитра сьогодні?
Буде, за пару хвилин ще.
Окей, тоді почнемо з загального такого вітального слова. Чому взагалі народилася ідея створення такої конференції, такого окремого вебінару? Можливо, вже знаєте, що вже більше року в Україні ми на національному рівні працюємо з питаннями захисту дітей в цифровому середовищі, і на ці проблеми об'єднали свої зусилля декілька міністерств, в тому числі Міністерства освіти, Міністерства внутрішніх справ, соціальної політики, юстиції, цифрової трансформації, школа суддів, Офіс Генерального прокурора. Все для того, аби наші діти були захищені в інтернеті І сьогодні наш семінар буде присвячений саме складової освіти, все, що стосується освіти для дітей в питаннях захисту в інтернеті. Ми сьогодні з вами будемо менше говорити про різні ризики. Бачили від вас багато запитань щодо ризиків, з якими діти можуть стикнутися в інтернеті, але ж це краще вас запрошую на окремий вебінар, який ми часто проводимо в рамках проєкту Stop Sexting, в тому числі для освітян, де ви можете дізнатися більше інформації про ризики, з якими діти можуть стикнутися в інтернеті. Сьогодні будемо з вами більше говорити про освітні програми, як вони можуть працювати в школах, з якого віку вони можуть працювати, в якому форматі, в яких предметах, які компетенції мають мати діти. І нам про це все сьогодні розповість наша колега. Розповідь буде на прикладі Великої Британії. Сьогоднішнім нашим спікером буде Вікі Шотболт. Вона є керівником громадської організації Parent Zone Велика Британія, яка спеціалізується на навчанні з питань безпеки дітей в онлайн. І також Вікі є членом комісії при уряді Великої Британії, що займається розробкою і впровадженням освітніх програм в школах щодо безпеки в інтернеті. Анастасія, скажіть, будь ласка, чи готовий в нас вже Дмитро до вступного слова? І тоді ми передаємо слово вам.
Так, одну хвилиночку.
Угу. Я поки що хотіла б представити директора Американської асоціації юристів ініціативи з верховенства права або ролі в Україні Дмитро Філіпенка. Організація Американської асоціації юристів ініціативи з верховенства права є нашим таким генеральним партнером і другом в тієї конференції. Я сподіваюся, що і далі ми будемо багато співпрацювати з метою безпеки в інтернеті і дітей, і дорослих. Тому, Дмитро, передаю слово вам.
Дякую, Анастасія. Шановні друзі, радий всіх вітати. Нашій організації дуже приємно брати участь в такому важливому проєкті. Ми вдячні нашим партнерам, Міністерству цифрової трансформації, Анастасії як керівнику проєкту Stop Sexting, а також Миколі Кулебі, уповноваженому президента з прав дитини, за таку можливість доєднатись до серії цих надважливих круглих столів, які ми проводимо в умовах пандемії онлайн. Ми бачимо, як світ трансформувався протягом останніх півроку, і ми бачимо, що всі ми, а також наші діти, отримали таку челендж, такий виклик, як до переходу до роботи та навчання в онлайні. Ми дуже дякуємо нашому сьогоднішньому спікеру за можливість поділитись досвідом Великої Британії в цьому приводі. А також я б хотів буквально 2 слова сказати про те, що наразі наша організація, Американська асоціація юристів ініціатива з верховенства права, впроваджує програму «Інтернет свобод в Україні». І ми впевнені, що інтернет-свободи, окрім того, що вони забезпечують демократію та верховенство права в усьому світі, ці свободи, вони подекуди наражають користувачів онлайн-послуг на ті небезпеки, з якими ми всі стикаємося в мережі. Тому я дуже радий і буду щасливий отримати досвід в Великої Британії в цьому приводі. Я дуже вдячний ще раз нашому сьогоднішньому спікеру і залюбки прийматиму участь активно в сьогоднішньому нашому круглому столі, передостанньому в серії, яких ми започаткували разом з нашими партнерами. Дякую всім.
Дуже вам дякую, Дмитро, за таку надихаючу промову. Ну тоді пропоную переходити відразу до справи і передавати слово нашому спікеру. А до того я хочу ще раз нагадати, хто до нас приєднався, про переклад, що якщо ви хочете обрати українську мову, а не англійську, якою буде зараз презентація, вам потрібно натиснути на глобус, який ви побачите внизу, біля кнопки «Вихід». Не нажимайте на вихід, нажимайте на переклад або перевод і обирайте іспанську мову. Саме на каналі іспанської мови у вас буде український переклад. Також ще раз прошу тих, хто зараз до нас приєднався, вимкніть, будь ласка, звук і відео для того, щоб не заважати колегам. Ну що, тоді, Вікі, передаю вам слово. Хочу ще раз представити Вікі Шолбол, керівника громадської організації Parent Zone Велика Британія, яка спеціалізується на навчанні з питань безпеки дітей в онлайні. Вікі, floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. I'm only sorry that my language skills are not very good, and I can't say at least hello in Ukrainian. Perhaps that's something I should have learned how to do before I joined this session. But hello, and thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm going to share my screen now, so I have some slides to share with you. I hope everybody can see that okay. Perhaps you can put in the chat if you have any problems with accessing those slides. I'm going to chat to you today for about 45 minutes to an hour. I'm sure that's going to be long enough for you to listen to me. And I have three broad areas that I want to talk to you about. The first one is, obviously, I want to introduce Parent Zone to you and explain a little bit about our work. I think our name sometimes confuses people because our work is much broader than working with parents, but parents are at the heart of what we do, and I will explain why that is so important in a moment. I'm going to talk to you about our approach to internet safety in the UK and the connection between internet safety and digital resilience, because digital resilience underpins all of the work that we do, and there's a very important reason for that, and I hope that's something that will be useful for you to hear about, because it influences the way we approach education for children in the UK. And finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've called here achieving success. I don't think any of us actually think that this is an issue that's going to be finished or dealt with wholly. It's going to be a problem that we have to keep revisiting, and the education programs have to be ongoing. It isn't something that is fixable as such, but it is possible to put in really robust education programs that make a huge difference to the safety of children online. So those are the three broad areas that I'm going to chat about, and then lots of time at the end for any questions. I will do my best to take any questions that you have. So just moving on now to introduce our work and tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do. And broadly speaking, we work in these three areas. The first and very important one for us is in schools. And the work that we do in schools, not just in the UK, we also have projects that run in Bangladesh, in Thailand, in America. We have people that engage with us from Australia. So quite a global spread of the programs that we do. The work that we do in schools is very much about taking an holistic approach to making sure that schools are receiving the education that they need, and that's through well-developed and designed curriculums for teachers to use with their students. But it's also about working with parents and the wider community that sits around a school. And the reason that's so important is that we know that simply educating children in schools is never enough. You do have to think, when you're planning an internet safety program, you have to think in the round, you have to think about that whole community approach that can support a child and make sure that they're safer online. The second area of work that we do is very much directly to families. We deliver support to parents. We run sessions for parents sometimes, and especially during COVID, they've been remote sessions. So we've been delivering lots of work online with families, but it's also about developing resources that are appropriate for parents. And again, what we know about working with parents is that you have to take a very rounded approach. So it's not enough to just give them leaflets. It's not enough to just design websites for them. You have to offer a complete package of support for parents because they have very different needs, very different levels of understanding, and their role is absolutely critical to raising children safely and confidently online. And then the third part, and this is going to be the first part of my talk that I really expand on a little bit, is the policy work that we do. And that starts, I guess, with my involvement with the UK Council for Internet Safety, where I sit on the executive board, which is a board that's chaired by 3 ministers, one from the Department for Education, one from the Home Office, and one from the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. And the board is made up of representatives from technology companies, from NGOs, from regulators, working together collaboratively to try and develop programs that will actually achieve the desired outcome. And it is that spread of collaboration that is so important. It's essential that you do have engagement from the education department, but also from law enforcement, working together to make sure that you're looking at this topic from all sides. So I sit on the executive board advising government, and what the executive board does in practice is to separate off into lots of smaller working groups, and I chair one of the working groups which looks specifically at the issue of digital resilience. We also sit on the education working group, and of course, as you might imagine from the name, what that group does is focus particularly on education and what children should be receiving in schools. So that's a piece of work that we're very engaged in. But I want to start just by looking at some of that policy and research work that we do, because that is really the foundation for our work. Here are some reports that we've done, some pieces of research that we've done. The first couple were looking at gaming and a new phenomenon that is no longer quite so new. Certainly if you're a teenager, you're probably very familiar with it, and that's skin gambling. And the reason that I've put those into my presentation is because they are a great example of how quickly the internet changes and how adaptable young people are at finding new ways to use the internet that mean we have to update our education approach all of the time, because no sooner do you think you've dealt with one sort of issue than you discover that a new issue has emerged and children are taking different risks that you hadn't necessarily developed resources for. And that was certainly the case for us when we started to explore those two topics, how gambling had become very much a part of children's gaming experience. Sharenting is some work that we did, and that was looking at this phenomenon of parents putting photos of their children online. And it was perhaps one of the lighter issues that we've dealt with, less serious harm to children, perhaps, but a very interesting one nonetheless, because we know that children learn their behaviour from what happens at home and what happens in their family context. And what we found with our research into sharenting was that parents typically were taking a very relaxed view about what was okay to share about their children. They were sharing photos of them in enormous numbers, enormous quantities. And I'm sure you're familiar with this, that families are very keen to share lovely photos of their children, and they forget that what they're modeling is a behavior to their children, that it's okay to share images. And I think when we then see children take part in what can be high-risk behaviours like sexting, it perhaps isn't all that surprising when actually, certainly in the UK, the most common age for a person to be sharing a sexually explicit image is somewhere in their mid-40s. And I think it's really important that we remember, and the research tells us, that adults are engaging in these behaviours in very, very large numbers. And therefore, it's not a huge surprise that children are following that example and doing it themselves. And then the final piece of research that I have on that slide is a piece of research that's called a shared responsibility. And that was the piece of research that we did with the Oxford Internet Institute, that looked at the question of what actually made a child safer online. And the hypothesis that we had was that if a child was fundamentally resilient, the chances were they were going to be more resilient online. They were going to be better able to navigate digital spaces safely and avoid harms. And what that research found was that that was indeed the case. A resilient child was much less likely to experience harm online, and crucially, more likely to be able to benefit from all of the opportunities that being online can provide. So the second part of that research was really about thinking about what made a child resilient. If being resilient was the thing that protected a child and made them safer in the end, what could we do to make sure that children were growing up resilient? And the answer to that was really interesting. The first part of that was that actually it's parenting. It's how a child is raised. It's the quality of their at-home parenting that makes the biggest difference to a child's level of resilience. And the other thing that was really interesting from that research was that it was also to do with a child's level of confidence, their attitude to technology, the messages they were given about technology and how they used it, that was really fundamental to how resilient they were. Children who were told that technology was dangerous and bad and they shouldn't be using it and they needed to be blocked and filtered, those children were less likely to be resilient. And I think you can all see how challenging some of that is, because typically when we first started doing internet safety in the UK, what we tended to do was focus very much on the harms, to try and tell children that the internet could be a dangerous place and they needed to avoid harms. We tried to use a rules and tools approach. We tried to say, use internet filters, block children from seeing anything they shouldn't see, and set some clear rules for them. And in actual fact, what we are learning from the resilience work that we're doing, from the body of research that's growing all of the time, what we're learning is that that straightforward approach simply isn't effective. And it's not effective for all sorts of reasons. But one of them is that it goes against what we understand about developing resilience. And that is, it tells children that the internet's a dangerous place. And what we need to be telling them is that the internet is a positive place that includes a certain number of dangers. And we have to get that balance of messaging right. And we have to be very, very careful about how we deliver that message. As you can see here, children that believe that the internet is a positive place, that it contributes positively to society, are more likely to be resilient self-regulators online. And so what we have to do as a society is move away from a single focus on online harm and risk and start talking about the opportunities, that the benefits of the online world that they can explore. We also need to remember that whenever we're thinking about education for children, we need to also be thinking about supporting parents, because parental strategies that simply restrict and monitor have the unintended consequences, the negative effect of undermining digital resilience and undermining more constructive engagement online. And I think you can probably see that if you think about children online and what happens when you try to put restrictions in front of a child. Children are programmed to get past boundaries. They push the boundaries, they test any rules that you set for them. It is, of course, really crucial that they have boundaries and that restrictions are in place. But because children are programmed to try and get around them, what you can do if you restrict a child too much online is push them towards less safe parts of the internet. So you end up with a very negative, unintended consequence if you encourage parents to simply block rather than engage. And fundamentally, the message is a really positive one to parents, because the message is simply that good enough parenting, it doesn't have to be perfect parenting because there is no such thing, but good enough parenting that allows children to take a certain number of risks and is able to support them with coping strategies and positive behaviours online those things are the things that are going to develop resilience long term, and those are the things that are going to keep children safer. So let me just unpack a little bit more what we mean when we're talking about digital resilience, because that was the first task that we had when we set up the Digital Resilience Working Group for the UK government. And we worked with clinicians and academics to try and unpick what digital resilience actually is and what it means. And it's a difficult concept to translate into something that's straightforward. It's a personality asset that children can draw on. It's not a fixed state. It's a little bit like keeping fit. You don't do it once, you have to keep doing it forever. And digital resilience is a combination of factors. It isn't one straightforward thing. But having done the work of looking at digital resilience, what we came up with were these 4 aspects that a digitally resilient child will have. And I think what's interesting about this breakdown is that you can see how different organizations, different partners, different people can contribute in very meaningful ways to the different strands of digital resilience. So if I start with one of the key pillars of digital resilience, which is understanding, and of course this is very pertinent to children and schools and developing a child's education program. A digitally resilient child will be able to understand when they're at risk online, and they'll be able to make informed decisions about the digital spaces that they're in. And we sometimes talk about that in internet safety, in road safety terms. It's a comparison that I'm not all that fond of, because for a long time in the UK, people hoped that we would just come up with a code, a simple set of rules that would keep children safe online, a little bit as we do for crossing the road. Of course, it's a lot more complicated than that in digital spaces. But I think there are some parallels between road safety, in that we don't tell a child that they shouldn't ever cross the road without an adult. What we tell them is there are dangers on busy roads, and there are safe ways to cross, and there are less safe ways to cross. And you need to learn how to cross safely. And I think that can be translated to the digital world. What children need to understand is why and when spaces are riskier, and how their behaviour should change when they're in those riskier spaces. And I think one of the very common spaces, one of the common activities that children are engaged in now is live streaming, as an example. And that's a functionality that is particularly risky for children because it's live, and because they don't always know who's going to be watching. And it's in live streams that children quite often get into all sorts of problems. Understanding that live streaming is a high risk activity and making sure that children have appropriate behaviours in a live stream context is a really important part of building their understanding. And that's just one example of work that needs to go in if you want to develop resilient children and make sure they have the relevant level of understanding of online spaces. The second pillar of digital resilience is really about knowing what to do if you need help. And I think one of the mistakes that we make quite often about children is assuming that because they are brilliant at adapting to new technologies and they pick things up seemingly without any need for instructions or explanations, certainly not from adults, they're usually very able to navigate their own way around new digital spaces. We assume that they know how to use reporting tools and that they know how to use tools like setting effective passwords or blocking people that are bothering them. And that's actually not the case. Children are not particularly good at using the tools that are there to make their online spaces safer. And that's something that we do need to educate them about and check in with them to make sure they are actually using them. But they also need to know how to get help from the adults in their lives. And that's not always straightforward for them, because very often when they have a problem online, they feel as though they've broken a rule. In fact, they may well have broken a rule. We put a lot of emphasis on making sure that parents set rules and boundaries, and schools obviously have lots of rules that children need to follow. So when something goes wrong, children are in the difficult position of having broken a rule and then needing help. But before they can get help, they have to admit that they've done something that they perhaps shouldn't have done. So knowing how to get help when you need it is a really important part of developing digital resilience, and it's a really critical role for adults to play when they're thinking about how they can make sure that children stay safe. Learning, obviously, is fundamental to the educating children, but it's not just about formal learning when we're thinking about that strand of digital resilience. Learning is about reflecting, it's about internalizing the learning, so not following somebody else's set of rules, deciding what your own rules are going to be and following them because you want to, because you recognize that they're the right thing to do and they are good for you. They're not just something that's imposed by other people. Influencing your own future choices is a really positive way to encourage children to make better decisions the next time they go online. So when a child has made a mistake or they've taken a risk and something's gone wrong, making sure that they have time to reflect on what went wrong and think about their behavior and what they might do differently next time is a really important part of the learning process. It's not just about simply telling them what they need to know. And then that final part of digital resilience is absolutely critical. And it's quite often, certainly in education settings, where professionals get involved in thinking about digital resilience and how they can support it. And it's the recovery strand of digital resilience. Of course, things go wrong for children, sometimes very seriously wrong, more often mistakes and problems and errors. And helping a child to recover is fundamental to supporting their digital resilience and making sure that they're going to be safer next time. One of the difficulties that we have when we think about internet safety and how that aligns with promoting digital resilience is that very often our messaging about online safety does not support the notion of recovery. What it does instead is say to children, what you put online is going to be there forever. And you have a digital footprint that will follow you around forever. And if you make a mistake now, it's going to mean that your university or your future employer will be able to see that mistake and it will follow you around. And that's a really problematic message if we want to help children to recover. We need to start to talk to them about the steps they can take to get past a problem and proactive things that they can do to make sure that that mistake that they made online doesn't follow them for life. Because if we don't do that, they don't recover, they don't learn, they don't re-engage with digital, and they don't create safer habits. And I suppose most importantly of all, they don't then have the opportunity to benefit from all of the things that a digital world can offer them. So just unpacking that a little bit and thinking about what good education programs need to look like and how we started to translate some of that thinking into our education programs in the UK and the programs that we deliver elsewhere through some of our other partnerships. We think about, in that understanding strand, developing resources and messaging that teaches children how to recognize risk for themselves and differentiating between different types of risk. So do they understand the difference between sharing a photograph in a live stream or live streaming themselves and sharing a message through WhatsApp? Do they understand the difference between something that's encrypted and therefore if it goes wrong, it's going to be very difficult for anybody to intervene and deal with that? Do they understand that it's riskier to meet strangers in a gaming environment than it is to play with people that they actually know offline as well? Which is not to say that it's not okay to meet strangers in online gaming. Of course it is. It's very much part of what the online gaming experience is. But can they differentiate the risk between gaming with strangers and gaming with people that they actually know offline? And it's that much more nuanced, detailed approach to helping children recognize risk in the first place and then understand the difference between different types of risk that helps them to make positive choices about what they're doing. And we really try and make that part of any learning resource that we develop. Thinking about teaching children to know how to get advice, are you teaching children how to get support once a risk has been identified? And are you signposting them to places that are trustworthy and comprehensive? And again, this is much more difficult in practice than it is in theory, particularly in the context of children relying on a lot of support from other online networks. So one of the things that is very fashionable, dare I say it, in the UK is the idea of peer-to-peer support. And peer-to-peer support, of course, is an incredibly valuable tool, and it's often the first place that a child will go if something has gone wrong to access support. But knowing that, are you making sure that where peer support is a preferred option, there are reliable, comprehensive information sources supporting that peer support? So it's really about thinking of an ecosystem of support as opposed to a single strand or a single message. And under Learn, when we're developing resources that support learning, we're thinking about giving children opportunities to reflect on what's happened, why it's happened, what they've learned, and what they would like to do differently. And I think one of the really crucial elements of this is that you need to work with children to develop their own understanding and make their own plans for how they would like things to be different next time they go online. One of the difficulties that we have with internet safety messaging, and it was a problem that we identified when we did some co-creation work with young people around a program that we run with Google in the UK. And that was that a lot of the learning that we were offering children just didn't resonate with their own lived experience of life online. So some of the messages that we were giving around things like sexting, for example, sharing intimate images, we were presenting to them as a very high risk behavior, one that carried all sorts of negative consequences, including legal consequences. And that simply wasn't their experience. Their experience of sharing intimate images was that it was part of romance. It was part of boyfriend-girlfriend dating, or indeed boyfriend-boyfriend dating or girlfriend-girlfriend dating. It was something that was a very natural, positive part of modern dating. And therefore, applying our lens to it wasn't really getting cut through. What was important was for us to say to them, what do you think the rules should be? What do you think would make it safer for you to do that behavior? And we understand that it's a behavior that's important to you, but you need to understand that it's important you do it in a way that's safe. And I think it's that shift in facilitating learning rather than giving them rules that has been really helpful in developing our thinking around education in the UK for children. And then finally, in the recovery strand, and this really is a question of to what extent are we encouraging students to seek further support from suitable networks if they've experienced harm. And that can be clinical support, it can be professional support, or it can be support from teachers, from parents, or from their peers. What's important is acknowledging that full recovery is essential. And the digital world doesn't make that particularly easy. One of the ways that the digital world undermines recovery sometimes is through the reporting online mechanic that most platforms have. Children very commonly experience reporting something to a platform and then never getting a message back about what's happened to that report. And that's just one example of why recovery is a particularly difficult thing to help young people achieve. So that is perhaps enough about digital resilience. I hope you are starting to hear from me how seriously we take digital resilience in terms of developing our education programs, and indeed how important the resilience is taken in the UK, because it does now underpin all of the work that we deliver in schools. And that's a shift. It's a shift away from our first efforts at internet safety, which were very much rules, tools, slightly frightening, telling young people about all of the negatives, worrying parents about all the terrible dangers that can happen online. And what we knew is that children could repeat all of those fear stories, but they didn't have the knowledge, the skills, and the behaviours that they needed in order to safely navigate the internet confidently and properly. And I think, just to summarise that digital resilience section, what's really critical is that you think about the knowledge that children need, the knowledge of functionalities, of behaviours, of risk factors. They need knowledge about the content that they're seeing, even if that content is sometimes things that we wish they hadn't seen at all. And that comes up a lot in the UK when you're thinking about radicalisation and extreme content, or sexualized content and pornography. These are subjects that we wish our children didn't need information about, but in a digital world they do need information about it, and it's vital that we give them knowledge about it in an age appropriate way. And that's very difficult. In the UK, we've just introduced a new curriculum for children called the Relationship and Sex Education curriculum. In primary schools, we've chosen not to make sex education mandatory, which is a great shame in my view, because children need that information at ever younger ages in a connected world. Then they need the skills, they need the practical skills, and assuming that they've got them just because they're good at using technology isn't enough. They need to understand how to practice the skills that they need, whether that's reporting skills or blocking skills, or the skills to speak out and articulate what's happened to them. Those skills are really important, and children need to be given opportunities to practice them and make sure that they know how to use them when they need them. And then finally, they need the behaviours. They need to understand what kind of behaviours are expected from them, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what's problematic, what they can do to contribute to a positive environment and not a negative environment. We need to explain those to them and not assume that they will just arrive by magic in children's understanding. So what does that look like in practice? And how do you take all of that thinking and evidence and research into something that's practical and actually start to make a difference to children's safety? How do we start to educate them for a digital world? And in the UK, I think these are probably the 4 areas that we've learned, and we didn't get there instantly. It's taken a long time to have these pieces in place, and one of them most certainly isn't in place yet. But the first thing is that government mandate. It has made an enormous difference in the UK, having government prioritise this subject. We started quite a long time ago with a review conducted by Professor Tanya Byron in the UK, and from that review, the UK Council for Internet Safety was set up. And without that government input, without that government energy and enthusiasm and push behind internet safety, it would never have had the profile or the impact that it's having. And I don't think that the technology companies would have been so quick to get on board and support internet safety education. You also need it actually mandated in the curriculum. Certainly in the UK, you do. Schools are very, very busy places in the UK, and I'm sure everywhere else in the world, and they have a lot to teach, and a lot is asked of teachers. But if we don't make it clear that internet safety has to be one of the things that they are required to teach, then it's something that very easily slips off the radar. But it's obviously not enough to just tell teachers that they need to teach this subject matter. They need training. you need to provide support to the professionals. We run a teacher training program in the UK that's really essential, not just to tell them how to do it, but to give teachers opportunities to share their own experiences of teaching internet safety and to learn from each other. So forgetting that teacher training is a huge mistake, and it's one that we made in the UK for a long time. I mean, I have just worked with the Department for Education on developing teacher training resources for the new RSHE curriculum. And it's very late in the day. The fact that we're only just developing those teacher training resources now shows just how late in the day it is. But they're coming, and they're going to be really important. Teachers also need teaching resources, and there's something pretty unique about the teaching resources that you need to teach internet safety well. And it goes all the way back to the start of this session, where I was talking about skin gambling, which is something that we've researched a lot. And that is that the internet changes. It's not like teaching geography or history or maths. It's different to that insofar as the risks change, the environment changes, and therefore the teaching resources have to change, and they have to be kept up to date. They have to reflect children's lived experiences. They have to reflect the technology that's coming through. We wouldn't have been talking to children about encryption 4 years ago. We probably wouldn't have been talking to them about live streaming 2 years ago. In-stream payments is something that's a relatively new mainstream phenomenon, but it's one that's obviously putting children at risk, and we wouldn't have been talking to them about that at all. In fact, we're probably not talking to them about it enough yet in the UK. So the teaching resources for internet safety need to be updated all the time. I would say our program of updating happens pretty much quarterly for some of our big partnership programs, and for our own membership program, it happens all the time. We are producing new resources for our members just to try and keep ahead of the curve. So I suppose what I'm saying there is, don't think that the teaching resource job is ever done. It's not. It is a job that is ongoing. We have to keep pace with the pace of the internet. And finally, and this is the point that I think we have not cracked at all in the UK, and it drives me slightly crazy that we still struggle with this so much, and that is quality control. And I think it's something that we really got wrong in the early days of internet safety, and that is that everybody was very keen to try and work out how we provided teachers and children and parents with the information that they needed. And what happened was that all sorts of people started providing bits of information. It might be broadband providers or children's charities with no digital expertise. It could be local schools who just found a local policeman who was enthusiastic about the subject matter. And everybody was trying very hard and wanting to do the right thing. But without quality control, without some proper foundation of evidence and messaging and an understanding of what was going to make a difference, you really do run the risk of unintended consequence of making a child less safe. And so quality control for me is something that needs to start at the beginning of any thinking about national programs, and it needs to be there throughout, and it needs to be monitored and maintained. And as I say, in the UK, quality control is still something that we don't do particularly well, and I hope it's something that UKIS will start to look at more seriously. So that's it from me. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour in terms of the work that we do. One of the things I know was mentioned in the introductory remarks was a question about what age do you start teaching internet safety? I haven't gone into that in any great detail, and the reason for that is there isn't an age. You start as soon as the child is born. When a child is born, you start with internet safety messages for parents, and that education needs to continue all the way through until they are adults. So there isn't really an age. Every age is the right age to start teaching internet safety education. So thank you for listening. That feels like quite a long time of listening to me. I hope it's been useful, and I'm really happy now to take any questions that you have.
Дуже вам дякую, Вікі, за таку цікаву і корисну презентацію. Я вже не перший рік працюю в цій темі, але ж насправді сьогодні навіть для мене було багато нових і цікавих елементів, тому дуже вам дякую і впевнена, що нашим учасникам теж було цікаво. Шановні учасники, прошу вас писати запитання, якщо вони є в чаті, а ми поки почнемо з тих запитань, які ви вже поставили в реєстраційній формі, і щоб ми могли почати на них відповідати. Тому, Вікі, буду до вас зараз звертатися з запитаннями. Перше запитання, яке ми отримали, я буду читати його. Я б хотіла дізнатися про мій план дій у випадку, коли дитина стає жертвою протиправних дій зі сторони однолітків чи дорослих в мережі інтернет. Мої кроки як вчителя, щоб захистити учня. Я думаю, що нам будуть дуже цікаво дізнатися, чи є такі плани в Британії, як воно працює. Щодо України, то хочу зазначити, що на початку вересня в рамках співпраці проєкту «Стоп-секстинг» з Міністерством освіти України будуть випущені рекомендації щодо онлайн-безпеки для педагогічних працівників, де буде детально розписано порядок дій вчителя у випадку, якщо ваш учень стикнувся, наприклад, з кібербулінгом, чи з сексторшеном, чи з секстингом. Тобто на початку вересня ми вже такі матеріали до вас підготували. Але ж, Вікі, чи могли б ви розповісти, як це працює в Британії? Бо, наскільки я знаю, в британських школах є окрема людина, яка відповідає за безпеку дитини загалом, від фізичного і сексуального насильства, такий єдиний координатор щодо безпеки. Чи могли б ви трошки більше про це розповісти?
Yeah, so in the UK, what would happen in that situation is that you would report that to the designated safeguarding lead. So in every British school, you will have somebody whose job it is to manage safeguarding within that school. And if a teacher becomes aware of a child who they believe has experienced harm, then they have a legal obligation to report that, and that goes to the designated safeguarding lead. The designated safeguarding lead reports in at every local authority level. We have a safeguarding board, and that report goes to the safeguarding board. And depending on the nature of the report, it will go to the appropriate authority, and that might be social services, it might be a police investigation, and we have the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Command of the National Crime Agency, and that would be the body that would investigate an online harm to a child. But it moves very quickly into formalised structures to deal with it, and you know, I think that's a really good model that we have in the UK.
Дуже вам дякую. Наступне наше запитання стосується того, як ви співпрацюєте зі школами, як мотивуєте школи приймати участь в ваших програмах або проводити такі програми, і як працюєте зі школами, які супротивляються, наприклад, не хочуть проводити такі програми.
That's a fantastic question. That partly goes back to that point I made about government mandating the need to teach internet safety education. So in the UK, we have an inspection regime called Ofsted, and we have a national curriculum. And in the national curriculum, schools have to teach they have to teach internet safety, and they will be inspected on internet safety, and that gives them the school grading. So they have a big push from government to do this properly. And we engage with around about 70% of schools in the UK. So our programs are in a lot of UK schools. And I think the reason that schools engage with us is because we make our programs flexible. So they are adaptable for each school. So we create suites of resources. We give them lots of options. We do as much of the work for them as we possibly can. We have a content team at Parent Zone creating resources all of the time. We do as much of the work for them as we can. And then we support them to use them well. So we do teacher training, and we let them adapt the resources for their own setting. And I think we approach every single school as a partnership. We ask them, what can we do to help you? And they will tell us, and we try our best to respond.
Дякую вам, дуже цікавий формат. Наше наступне запитання. Ефективні форми і методи уникнення цькування дітей в інтернеті методика формування навичок медіаграмотності учнів. Мені здається, про методику ми говорили. Перше запитання більше стосується уникнення цькування. Можливо, ви могли б розповісти про програми навчальні, які ви застосовуєте, саме що стосується кібербулінгу. Бо я зроблю невеличку ремарку, в Україні є законодавство щодо булінгу, яке також в себе враховує булінг з використанням онлайн-технологій. І в випадку, коли вчитель дізнається про булінг дитини в освітньому середовищі, він має відразу повідомляти в поліцію, створюється комісія в школі. Тобто до булінгу в Україні відноситься дуже-дуже серйозно, інколи, мені здається, прям навіть серйозно. Бо я розумію, що дитина, яка булить когось, вона в першу чергу дуже часто потребує допомоги, а не осудження чи штрафу в поліції. Яким чином ви, які програми вважаєте найбільш ефективними, що стосується кібербулінгу серед учнів?
That's really interesting because we do take bullying very seriously, and schools are all required to have a bullying policy so that it's clear how bullying will be dealt with in schools. But we don't go so far as to say that a case of bullying has to be reported to the police. That's must be quite complicated. And I'm reflecting on what I said about children knowing how to get help if they need it. I'm guessing that if you're a child who thinks you've made a mistake and you've said something unkind to someone online, it must be quite difficult if you're concerned that you'll be reported to the police if you go forward and ask for some help on that. So the way we tackle it in the UK is we have schools are required to have bullying policies. We also have multiple different bullying education programs, some from specialist charities, some from general charities. The program that we run with Google in the UK talks about behaviours. That's the way we tackle it. We don't tackle bullying as a single behaviour because it's typically more than a single behaviour. It can be to do with peer pressure. It can be the child themselves, the bully themselves, feeling very sad and isolated and problems with that individual child. So we approach it from teaching children how to behave online and teaching them about kindness and the impact that their behaviour has on other people. But there are multiple different interventions that we have. I think one of the interesting things about cyberbullying that we learnt in the UK when some research was done, again, interestingly, by the Oxford Internet Institute, was that it rarely exists online by itself. And the more we talked about cyberbullying as a separate issue to bullying in the round, the less help we were doing. It was really important to start talking about bullying and not cyberbullying as though it was separate to what I would think of as old-fashioned bullying.
А можете ось тут трошки пояснити, що саме, як ви дійшли до того, що це не така велика проблема? Ну, дуже буде цікаво узнати більш детальну інформацію про ваші здобутки в процесі вивчення.
I'm not sure that I said that it started going away. I think there's some very interesting research that came out of Australia actually about bullying education programs, and it informs our work in this subject very heavily, and that is that the more you talk about bullying, it tends to go up, not down. So bullying education programs quite often have the unintended consequence of increasing levels of bullying, whereas generic education programs that talk about standards of behaviour and what's expected in a school community and concepts like kindness and personal values and how you would like to be treated and how to treat other people, those programs are often more effective than programs that specifically go in and just talk about bullying, and even more so if you're talking about cyberbullying, and that distinction between bullying and cyberbullying being a really not a particularly helpful one.
Дуже вам дякую, мені здається, дуже слушна рекомендація. Так, в нас залишилося ще декілька запитань, і одне з них стосується захисту персональних даних учнів і учителів. І я думаю, що тут дуже цінно було б, якщо б ви розповіли про британські політики щодо публікації приватних даних дітей на сайтах школи, наприклад, чи публікації фото дітей без дозволу батьків. Яка політика з цього приводу існує в Великій Британії?
Oh, that's such a big that's a really big and difficult question. So, at a baseline level, obviously in the UK, being part of Europe, not for long, we have the GDPR regulation, and that was a moment when I think all institutions reviewed what they were doing with data and how they were sharing data. That said, there are no restrictions on parents being able to share their children's data on platforms like Facebook, and we see very commonly that parents will share, or schools will share, information about children, sometimes inadvertently. It might just be in pictures on platforms like Twitter, and there are no specific restrictions around that, or even guidelines around doing that. Data sharing of pupils' data in the UK is a really murky, difficult, messy legal topic, because teachers do share data about children that they capture, sometimes with third parties, not always with parental consent, and it's really not clear where that sits in terms of the GDPR and Information Commissioner's Office, which is the office that regulates it in the UK, and children's rights. So children's data is a massive mess in schools in the UK, I would say.
Я зрозуміла, дуже вам дякую. Реальні методи надання методичних послуг здобувачам освіти в дистанційних умовах навчання. Я знаю, що Велика Британія пережила локдаун, ізоляцію, карантин, так само, як і Україна. Скажіть, будь ласка, як ви трансформували чи трансформували ваші методи навчання учнів під час карантину? Чи побачили ви якісь зміни, можливо, в ризиках, з якими діти стикаються, чи потребу в якихось нових знаннях в результаті карантину? В общем, ваші спостереження і зміни, через які ви пройшли в процесі щодо навчання через карантин?
So many lessons learned, and some of them very positive messages, some of them really, really very challenging. So in the challenging bucket, I think initially during the lockdown, there was a big rush to provide students with resources that they could access online. And very quickly, schools realised that children don't always have access to devices. They're quite often sharing devices in homes. And the need to make sure that they were blending offline and online was very tricky. There were certainly teachers who reported not having any contact with their students at all. And there were others who had students sitting in front of screens for 8 hours, and that was a worry as well. So in terms of delivery, it was very challenging and very difficult. For us as an organisation, it was also incredibly positive. So we started delivering virtual assemblies to students. So we started to run live stream virtual assemblies that children could log in to at home, but any students that were still in school could log in as well. And we had live interaction between our presenters and the teachers in school and the pupils. And that was a really positive, collaborative experience. We've been doing live events like this one, actually, exactly as you're doing now. We've been doing that for teachers and delivering online teacher training, incredibly positive and effective, and actually much easier for teachers to take a couple of hours out and attend a digital webinar than it is to go to a training event. And for parents, even more so. So getting parents to come to parent-teacher events, really difficult in the UK. Parents don't go into schools in large numbers. It's almost impossible for all sorts of reasons. Doing it digitally has actually been easier, much easier. So I think for us, it's been a real mix. There have been things that have been very challenging, but actually delivering a lot of this education online has meant we could reach more people and have just as big an impact, and in many cases engage more people than we could before.
Да, я м'ют. Вибачте, ми в рамках освітнього проєкту «Стоп-секснг» насправді теж побачили, що під час карантину більше батьків були готові освоювати ті знання, більше був інтерес з боку вчителів. Тому для нас це теж було такою позитивною складовою, що люди почали більше уваги приділяти саме безпеці дітей в інтернеті. І наше останнє запитання буде стосуватися питання, на яке я вже, мабуть, 2 роки шукаю відповідь. І говорила вже з багатьма колегами в Великій Британії, але ж сподіваюся, можливо, у вас теж будуть якісь рекомендації. Воно стосується освітніх програм для дітей з затримкою розвитку, або для дітей з ментальною інвалідністю, або для дітей з інвалідністю загалом. Тобто, яким чином ви проводите навчання для таких дітей, бо ми дуже часто розуміємо, що такі діти, вони ще більш уразливі в інтернеті, інколи онлайн – це єдине коло спілкування, де вони можуть знаходити інформацію, знаходити друзів, але ж разом із тим стандартні формати навчання не завжди для них підходять. Яким чином ви працюєте з такими дітьми?
That's a very relevant question for me right now because we are developing work with exactly those audiences right now for one of our partnerships. And the answer is that you have to develop resources for multiple categories of children, whether that's children with physical or mental disabilities, children who are deaf, each audience, children on the autistic spectrum, each audience needs something slightly different. And so for us, it's going to be about developing targeted resources for that audience and taking what we do with other audiences and simply simplifying it is not enough because the messages need to be different as well, not just in how you deliver them, but in also what they contain. So I can't give you a complete answer on that because we are in the middle of developing some of those resources now, but it is a complex challenge.
Але ж це насправді дуже радує те, що йде така робота, бо ми в Україні отримуємо багато запитів на такі матеріали, і такі уроки, тому будемо дуже раді тримати контакт по цій темі. Для України це вкрай важливо. А в нас все з запитаннями, які ми отримали з форми. Є в нас ще запитання щодо шкільних політик, щодо безпеки, які включають онлайн-безпеку. Якщо є у вас можливість надіслати нам посилання чи рекомендацію на таку політику, то ми включимо в лист до наших учасників. Шановні колеги, якщо у вас є ще якісь запитання, це остання мить, коли ви можете їх задати. Або якщо ні, то доведеться з ними залишатися і далі шукати можливість їх задати. Я зі свого боку дуже хочу подякувати вам, Вікі, за таку можливість сьогодні послухати вашу презентацію, відповіді на всі наші запитання. Насправді, було розуміння, що це не проста система навчання дітей онлайн-безпеки, але ж після нашої сьогоднішньої зустрічі ми зрозуміли, що це дуже-дуже комплексна задача, і, мабуть, ключове для мене сьогодні було те, що ці програми, вони мають постійно оновлюватися, бо, знаєте, є таке враження, що програми, наприклад, з якихось сталих предметів, вони якби один раз розробилися, і діти можуть їм користуватися, і вчителі можуть користуватися. Але ж насправді те, що ми бачимо з інтернетом, що він постійно змінюється, виникають новітні ризики, новітні програми, і ми маємо постійно змінювати і наші навчальні підходи також. Тому я вам хочу сьогодні подякувати. Бачу багато подяк в нашому чаті. І також нагадування, що нам треба з вами провести невеличке опитування до того, як ми з вами розстанемося. Настя, прошу вас вивести опитування. Шановні колеги, просимо вас обрати оцінку, де 1 – це мінімальний, 5 – це максимальний. Як ви оцінюєте ваші знання з теми до відвідання цього вебінару, з теми того, як треба навчати дітей безпеці в онлайні. Оберіть, будь ласка, оцінку від 1 до 5. 1 – це мінімальний, 5 – це максимальний. Бачимо 14%. Давайте хоча б половину почекаємо учасників, щоб прийняли участь. Так, чи будуть у нас ще відповіді? 40%. Бачимо, що більшість нас відповідає, що це було 4. Дякую. Настя, можна нам наступну форму? 46% оцінюють на 4 свій рівень знань. Давайте другу форму. І як ви оцінюєте ваш рівень знань зараз, після відвідування цього вебінару? Чи збільшилися ті знання, Бачимо 3%, 11, 14. Так, бачимо, що знання в нас зросли, 42%. Які ви цікаві? Як питали ми про знання до відвідання вебінару, та менша кількість людей прийняла участь. А зараз бачимо більше і бачимо, що 65% оцінюють на 5. Це дуже позитивно і дуже я від цього радію. На одному з вебінарів, насправді, у нас оцінка до відвідування вебінару була більша, ніж після відвідування. І це, насправді, теж гарний приклад того, як інколи нам здається, що ми дуже гарно знаємо якусь тему, потім починаємо її вивчати, розуміємо, що ми знали лише частину, а світ набагато більше. Ось тому я вам дуже дякую і рада, що ті знання сьогодні були цікаві. І я хочу зараз передати слово Вікі для такої прощальної промови і декількох слів натхнення для нашого подальшого шляху в цій непростій роботі.
Thank you. I mean, I guess the only thing I would say in summary is that this is an ongoing task, and we've been working on it for 14 years at Parent Zone, and pretty much every month our thinking develops and we face a new challenge, and we have to iterate and improve and constantly challenge ourselves to find better ways to do this. And it's a fascinating challenge, and one that I'm really happy.
В 9:30 точно?
Так, учасники, прошу в когось вимкнути звук, а Вікі навпаки включити звук.
Ви не включали звук? Чому мене включений?
Так, у вас включений.
Не включила.
Да, вибачте, зараз ми когось зам'ютимо, всіх учасників просили. Так, Вікі, дуже вибачаюся. Останні слова ми вас порушили.
I was simply saying that, you know, this is a challenge that doesn't go away, and it's a really exciting one because it means that our work continues and we are always finding new ways to respond to the topic. So it's been great to connect with you, and I hope that we get to work together some more in the future. And I left some links on the end of my presentation. Do check us out and feel free to email us or join the free membership or stay in touch. And it's been lovely talking to you.
Дуже вам дякую, Вікі, ми теж були дуже раді і з радістю тримаємо далі зв'язок. Як тільки отримаємо від вас посилання, відразу, колеги, надішлемо презентацію і посилання від Вікі. Тоді всім бажаю чудового дня і до нових зустрічей. Дякую вам.